I was keen to start a company. I'd been involved as a director of a previous company, and following some tricky experiences, I was keen to have my own opportunity to, in a sense, I guess, like design my own organizational culture, but not really knowing much about anything. I didn't have an obvious place to begin with what that company should be. So I'd done about 10 minutes in marketing. So I thought, well, that's as good a place as any to kick off. I think if I'd realized at the time just what a tit I was going to make out of myself for the first 2, maybe 3 years, I never would have had the audacity to have done it. But thankfully I didn't. So I sort of stumbled through the first few years. And as I say, now sort of 10, 12 years on, everything's in pretty good shape. But yeah, that's how it began.
And you mentioned there an important thing about culture. In terms of that building culture, and I'm sure we'll come on to this later on in the questions, but what were the kind of things that you were striving to build that you couldn't when you were working for someone else in another business?
And the first thing to say is like the world has changed a bit. So when I look back to my really early experiences at work, I recognise that the world was a slightly different place. So maybe it isn't a kind of fair comparison, but there were certain things that took place that I didn't really feel comfortable with. And I just felt in certain respects, I think maybe the thing that bothered me the most was an excessive tolerance for high performers that were also arseholes. And I just think that's one of the core things. I think it's so easy to be overly flexible with people who basically, they deliver a commercial result for the business and therefore you make every excuse about their behavior in the workplace. And that was one of the things that frustrated me. I was fascinated by how you build a team and get the best out of people, how you motivate people, how you sort of tap into their strengths, etc. So I just was fascinated by the whole thing. I probably didn't realize how difficult it was. I think it's very easy to judge and criticize when you've not tried to do it yourself. But yeah, that was a big learning curve.
Yeah, that high performing bad apple thing is really difficult to come to terms with, but it's important. You're right, because that bad apple, even though they're a high performer, will spoil the rest of them. You will end up with levers and churn as a result of that individual. In terms of, obviously, you mentioned fitness and sort of the charitable work that you get involved with. What drew you to those particular sectors in terms of your focus?
So I think the health and fitness one was a bit by accident. We had a couple of clients in the gym sector that just were fantastic case studies, and they led to lots of other work in the health and fitness market, then working with nutrition brands and fit tech brands, etc. I think the charity one was a little bit more intentional, bit of a generalization, but you tend to find quite a lot of nice people working in charities, and we had some lovely relationships, and we just found that when they went from one charity to another, they very often took us with them. So yeah, they're nice spaces, but it's very different from the work that we do in B2B, and we've tried to now kind of separate the different parts of the business to ensure that we've got the right people sort of operating within each of those teams.
And in terms of that structure, can you walk me through from a high level, like the structure? Have you got separate teams by sector? How do you align your people around your target clients?
So I'm a really big advocate of like sector specialism, which is, ironically, marketing agencies aren't terribly good at positioning themselves. And I was involved in some research years ago where we surveyed a large number of business owners and asked them to rank the different traits, the different characteristics that they would look for in a service provider. And I can't remember them all, but there were things like, trustworthiness, expertise, price, partner-led service, blah, blah, blah. Yep. The two that by an order of magnitude came out on top were commercialism and sector expertise. In other words, like, do they know our world? Do they talk our language, etc.? Do they know what our competitors are up to? For a long time, we've tried to develop that, but it's been quite hard because I think fundamentally, you have to make sure that at your core, you are delivering really good work irrespective of the domain. So we initially, I was kind of obsessed with, right, how do we build those core competencies? And then I think we kind of moved on to the next layer, which was then more about building sector-specific teams. So we have a sector-agnostic operations team, and then we're building these kind of pods around that, one for health and fitness, one for B2B, and then the charity is a bit of a sort of hybrid between the two.
I suppose as a result of that, you sort of ended up talking their client's language, which always makes that sort of sales engagement process a little bit easier.
Marketing is not difficult, but it requires work, and the information is generally out there. And actually, if you understand what the best brands, the most successful brands are doing in that particular space, where they're spending their money, where they're generating their traffic, where they're engaging with their audience, etc., there is very real value to that intelligence, to that insight. So I think it helps from a sales perspective because, of course, it's reassuring to the customer that you can talk their language. But I actually think at a operational level that there's real substance to it as well. I think if you understand the mechanics, you just know. Of course, there's like a layer of creativity that needs to sit on top of that is unique to that particular brand.
Yep.
But under the bonnet, there is something very particular about most industries.
Yep. No, absolutely. We see that with like legal sector and insurance and financial services. So it is, it's massive in terms of being relevant to those clients. In terms of the back end of the business, what innovation have you got behind the scenes that's really helping you grow and set yourself apart?
I think innovation's an interesting thing, right? Because everyone's obviously, like every company now is supposedly, an innovative organization, and most sets of values will contain the word innovation somewhere. If we're honest, most of it's bollocks. Like we were talking about Rory Sutherland earlier, and he's got this lovely quote where he says to the effect of, innovation is leaving room for ideas that don't make sense. In other words, if you follow the path of like rationality, you just end up in the same place as everyone else, and that's the opposite of innovation.
Yep.
And I think that you have to be very, very deliberate about it. I think the key words there in that quote are leaving room for, or leaving space for, and that means either time or having dedicated people or teams for that innovation work. So we have certain mechanics in place or mechanisms in place where, for example, at the end of each month, we will sit down as a team, and each person will have to say, this is specifically how I've used ChatGPT or whatever the kind of the tool is to do something better or faster or more efficiently in my role. But I feel like we have to take it a lot further. I feel like our next step is we need someone who's specifically owning that and championing that within the organization. There's a general focus within Boss on that, as there is in most companies. I think probably our only real example of going a step further recently has been, we've developed, for want of a better description, a dashboard that essentially captures the entire marketing process from market research, brand strategy, content strategy, every imaginable channel activity, analytics, analysis. We have a dashboard that captures about 200 and 250 different components to that process. It's just, I guess it's like the digital representation of my brain, because I think in quite like an analytical, structured way, and it stresses me out how ambiguous most marketers are about their definitions and their processes.
Yep.
So we have this dashboard, and we have recently started using like a spreadsheet integration for ChatGPT. So theoretically, a CMO or a business owner could answer about a dozen questions relating to their business and their market, and it would populate the entire thing, from all the market research, the brand, the vision statement, the values, the color palette, the typeface, content strategies, channel activity, priority channels, the priority metrics they should be tracking, etc. And it's not really with a view to sell it as a product, but it's more to illustrate what I think is quite a comprehensive and systematic approach to marketing that we have at Boss. So I would say, that might be an example of something that we're doing a bit differently.
Yeah, interesting. So I heard a story in another podcast about, I think it might have been P.T. Barnum that we know for like circus, that type of stuff. But at P.T. Barnum, I think Otis Elevators, they weren't selling many elevators. It's something like, say they were selling 100 elevators a year, and people just weren't buying elevators because they built this great technology to make elevators safe, but no one knew about it. And they decided to do this practical demonstration. They went somewhere, rented out this space, and they had this elevator installed, and he was like stood on top of it, and his assistant chopped through the cables. And he said, right, chop through the rest of them. And then literally the elevator falls about 2 feet and comes to a stop. And before you knew it, like the year after, he sold 2,000 elevators and 3,000. And now you routinely see Otis elevators. And that practical demonstration that you've got there of that, this is the dashboard that shows the secret sauce, is it gives people that tangible of like, this is what it's going to do for me. I can see it now. I can bring it to life. Yeah,
I think so. So we're pretty close to that, and I'm probably more excited about it than I really should be. We'll see what it actually comes to, but I think if nothing else, it's a way, as I said, of illustrating our approach, and also I think with internal people when they join the company, like as I say, it is the kind of digital kind of personification of me in a sense, and the way that my brain works and the way that I look at how you create marketing strategies. So I think operationally it's been quite useful as well. And I think as much as anything, it's important to have a project that forces you to make use of these tools, because otherwise, if you're only ever playing with them in the abstract, I think it's difficult to really understand, the kind of practicalities.